While many taxpayers struggle to make ends meet, ministers and their deputies reportedly do not pay a cent for municipal services such as water, electricity at their official residences.
Ministers and their deputies now have access to unlimited free water and electricity. Government is defending this, saying they're entitled to the perks as part of the executive.
Government is already spending money protecting ministers from load shedding through the use of generators, and when the price of the electricity that you pay for has gone up by over 350% in the last 10 years.
The DA says it's an insult to South Africans that government ministers no longer have to pay for water and electricity. The party wants the president to scrap what it calls outrageous provisions.
Earlier this year, we released information on 20 million rand spent for luxury vehicles for ministers during the COVID lockdown period. Now there's this information about ministers no longer having to pay their own water and electricity bills, and it really is just a slap in the face.
Surely government would have had to have read the room, which clearly they did not.
President Ramaphosa was speaking to the nation, saying that we must pay for services, we must prevent illegal connections, yet back at the ranch it's a completely different culture altogether, while millions of people are battling to even make ends meet.
Good morning and welcome to the Democratic Alliance press conference, where we'll be talking about the ongoing saga of the Ministerial Handbook. Joining me here today, Dr. Leon Schreiber, the DA Shadow Minister of Public Service Administration and a Strategy Whip. And next to him, we have Zakhele Mbhele, the DA Shadow Minister of the Presidency, Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation. If we have a look at the revelations that have come out over the last days and weeks that the DA has exposed, it seems that the saga around the Ministerial Handbook about water and lights being carried, the cost being carried by taxpayers instead of the ministers themselves, and a host of other revelations, it seems just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, we have yet more revelations. And for this, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Schreiber.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you very much, Zach, also for joining, and of course also to the media colleagues who came out today. As Richard mentioned, this is essentially an update or the next phase of the DA's work in this regard on the Ministerial Handbook. The two big revelations that have come out are about the fact that the ministers no longer pay for water and electricity at the official residences, and also that the President has expanded the staff component in ministerial offices to the point where it's going to cost taxpayers an additional 87 million rand per year. And even that figure may not be the final one, because there is a mechanism now created in the handbook for ministers to even exceed that new limit on the number of people in offices. I think this has led to huge public outrage, and that's why the DA is taking these next steps today. So, as I mentioned, over the past 2 weeks, the DA has methodically exposed to the people of South Africa how President Cyril Ramaphosa secretly abuses the Ministerial Handbook to dish out expensive perks to ministers and deputy ministers. Due to Ramaphosa's amendments to the handbook, taxpayers now have to foot the entire water and electricity bills for official ministerial residences, whether they are government-owned or privately owned. And under Ramaphosa's amendments, taxpayers will also spend 87 million rand more every year on additional staff in ministerial offices. Now, news about these amendments came in the midst of a spiraling cost of living crisis, rolling electricity blackouts, and now a full-blown water emergency in Gauteng. These changes were also implemented under a veil of complete secrecy as far back as April this year. And it was only through the work of the DA in Parliament that we were able to uncover and expose these costly amendments. That the President has dictatorial powers to force taxpayers to pay millions more for ministerial perks without even having to report it to Parliament is an assault on our democracy. It is a flagrant conflict of interest that Ramaphosa unilaterally and secretly decides on perks for himself and his cabinet colleagues, even when these perks cost the people of this country dearly. Now, the DA has already laid a complaint with the Public Protector over the apparent fact that there is also no law that provides for the existence of the Ministerial Handbook. In our view, it is also clearly inconsistent with the Constitution that the President can hide the milking of taxpayers from this Parliament. But Ramaphosa also does not need to wait for the Public Protector to make a finding. It should be obvious to him by now that the public does not accept his government's lame excuses for why the President should have dictatorial powers over this handbook. As a result, the DA is today directing an ultimatum to Ramaphosa in his personal capacity to first of all apologize to the people of South Africa, secondly to scrap the Ministerial Handbook in its second form, and thirdly to replace the handbook with an open and transparent new process where Parliament gets the power to decide which limited and properly costed cabinet benefits may be warranted in certain cases. Ramaphosa has until Friday, 21 October, to meet the DA's demands. We have noted that various civil society organizations share the DA's concerns about this issue, including COSATU. Consequently, if Ramaphosa fails to meet our demands by Friday, we will extend a hand of cooperation to formations across civil society to mobilize for a march on the scene of Ramaphosa's crime, a place called President Estate in Pretoria. This estate is home to dozens of ministerial mansions, including the official presidential residence. It is behind the walls of this estate that ANC ministers and deputy ministers raise their glasses to the fact that they enjoy free electricity and water while the rest of the country is crippled by power blackouts and thirst. It is inside the mansions on this estate that ministers are fed by food aids and feted like royalty, while 30 million South Africans live in extreme poverty, with many trapped on the verge of starvation. It is inside President Estate where Ramaphosa and his fellow ANC cadres live like kings, secure in comfort and completely insulated from the suffering and the failing state they have caused for everyone else trying to scrape by outside the palace walls. Ramaphosa's response to this crisis of confidence in his administration has been lackluster. Instead of apologizing for his insultingly dictatorial conduct and withdrawing these perks, Ramaphosa sent Minister Mondli Gungubele to try and defend the indefensible. In a country with 34% unemployment, Gungubele claimed with a straight face that ministers who get paid 2.4 million rand per year deserve free electricity and water because their jobs are supposedly insecure. It would be hard to find a more blatant admission of how out of touch the ANC government is with the people than this particular comment. The truth is that these benefits are indefensible. Ordinary South Africans who are lucky enough to be employed use their salaries to pay for their own water, electricity and homes. If taxpayers pay for all of these things for ministers, then what is the point of their 2.4 million rand salaries? In effect, South Africans are paying double salaries to a cabinet that has failed them on every conceivable metric. It is this point that President Ramaphosa apparently fails to understand. The public outcry we have witnessed over the past week is not purely about taxpayers footing the water and electricity bills of a failed cabinet. It is about what it symbolizes. South Africans know that it is purely due to the ANC's thievery and incompetence that our country no longer has a reliable supply of electricity. They know that even though the dams are full, taps have run dry in places like Gauteng because the ANC has destroyed the water infrastructure. They know that the trains have derailed, that policing has failed, and that our economy is collapsing due to three simple letters: A, N, and C. The public revolt against Ramaphosa's Handout handbook is therefore not only about free electricity and water, or the fact that taxpayers must now foot the salary bill of cadres that the ANC can no longer afford to pay. The revolt is against the failed ANC itself. It is against decades of suffering and decline engineered by this government. The revolt is against load shedding, against water cuts, against crime, and against poverty. Moreover, it is in Ramaphosa's own best interests, as well as in the interests of our democracy, that he concedes to the DA's demands on the Ministerial Handbook. We only need to look at countries like Tunisia and more recently Sri Lanka for examples where corrupt governments that had been in office for many years were forced out over seemingly isolated incidents. In Tunisia, it was the suicide of a fruit seller. In Sri Lanka, it was skyrocketing food prices. Yet those specific problems were merely the last straw that broke the camel's back. I want to warn the President that given the scale of the public outrage over the Ministerial Handbook, that if he refuses to concede to the DA's demands, he will be putting our democracy in danger. South Africans are simply not going to accept any longer the vulgar spectacle of a president telling them to pay for water and electricity that they no longer receive themselves, while he and his ministers get those services for free. The sooner Ramaphosa meets our demands, the better. If the president fails to scrap this handbook, society will mobilize against him and his government, and the DA will be right out front leading that effort to sweep the ANC out of power in 2024, starting at the gates of Pretoria Estate. Thank you. I would now hand over to Zach, I think, Richard, to say a little something about Minister Mbhele specifically as well.
Yes, no, thank you very much, Leon. And this whole issue is just another egregious symptom of the kind of hypocrisy and, in fact, the double injury that is being meted out of the ANC elites, not only exempting themselves from load shedding, but then making the taxpayers to foot that bill while they are secure in their comforts and in their luxury, and just demonstrate how out of touch the ANC government is with gross reality. And the comments of Minister Mbhele around how they should be treated and how they're abusing this shows how out of touch they are. There's no greater security than the 2 points whatever salary they get every year. And it is quite egregious. And if nothing else, it reinforces this long-standing extractive pattern we've seen of the ANC elites consuming for themselves selfishly from the public purse and at the expense of public services, such as the SAPS VIP protection units.
Thank you very much, both of you. I think it's very clear from what we've heard today is that this is very much like a let them eat cake moment, and that the public have said enough is enough. We welcome any questions from the media, and we will put them to the panel to answer them. I have a question first coming through that is the Ministerial Handbook available to the media and the public, or is it only available to ministers? If it is available, where is it available?
Okay, I can take that one, Richard. So perhaps just a quick backstory on this question, because it actually is important. These changes were made in April of this year to the Ministerial Handbook. The previous version that had come into effect was from November 2019. And in April, these changes were made without a single indication from the President to the public, to the media, or even to Parliament that they had been made. Now, as you heard today, some of them will cost upwards of 87 million rand a year. And yet the President is not compelled and certainly didn't feel like he had to inform the public of this change. So it was only through a parliamentary question where the Minister of Public Service and Administration indicated that in fact there had recently been changes that we found out about this in September. And then I was directed to an obscure link somewhere on the departmental website where this handbook is available. And that's how essentially I got hold of it. But what I can do is to put this on the DA website. I think, Richard, we should do that and make that available in the communication that we do about this going forward. But the bigger point here is really about the fact that this should not be possible. It should not be possible for a president to introduce measures that cost tens of millions of rands without any obligation to even tell us about it. And that's what the substance of the Public Protector complaint is about. It is about having this handbook declared essentially illegal in the way in which it currently operates, and to ensure that, as with any other piece of government spending, whether it's the budget, whether it's remuneration, it ultimately is Parliament that decides, because at the moment it is a secretive and abusive situation, which makes it very difficult to even know when these changes are actually made.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Schreiber. What is it that the DA hopes to achieve? What would you do if the DA were the ruling party? Well, of course, we prefer governing party as to ruling party, but hopes to achieve?
I think, first of all, this point about reforming the way the system operates, it should not be for the DA or the ANC or the president to decide these things. We have a parliament in this country. It should go through parliament like all other decisions around remuneration. It should go through parliament in a transparent way like all other legislation. Why is there an exception in this regard? So that is the first and most fundamental thing that we have to change. The DA is not waiting to get into government in 2024 to do this. We've approached the public protector. We're applying pressure through the public. And as I said, we will work with civil society to mobilize against this government if they refuse to change the process, not only these particular perks. When it comes to the specific things like free water and electricity, the inflation of staff salaries, I want to make this suggestion, that if these proposals had been public before they were implemented, if they had gone through Parliament, if they had gone through committee, they wouldn't have happened. Because we as members of Parliament would have been able to warn the public. We would have been able to say, hang on, you want to spend 87 million rand on what? And we would have prevented even the months of abuse that has played out since April. So it is really fundamentally at its heart about the process of accountability and democracy. And I think that is a big part of why the public is so outraged about this.
Thank you very much. Zach, I think this one is probably more in your lane as well. The question is simply, who is responsible for monitoring this?
Well, so we have the Department of DPME, Department of Performance Monitoring and Evaluation, which is under the Minister in the Presidency, Mr. Mbhele. And so they are the ones who are meant to be doing this kind of analysis and this overview in order to at least prevent this sort of thing, because they should see how resource allocation is either rational or sort of getting value for it. So there's an avenue to follow up on there within my portfolio. And I think also to the previous point by Leon is that the question of what should this spur on is this really should also be a wake-up call to the public, to the voting public, to be more active citizens, ask more questions, strengthen the accountability, because what we're looking at is a demonstration of the old metaphor that the forest kept voting for the axe because the handle was also made of wood. You know, this could be the axe that's cutting down your own forest. So let's look at that, yeah.
The last question we have on our list that is coming now, Leon, is perhaps if Pretoria is the official residence of ministers, why is this a problem?
Well, it's not a problem in and of itself that there is a place where the residences are. It is a problem that is the scene where there's free water and electricity. It is a problem that is the scene where there are now positions called food aides that are, as far as I can deduce, serving ministers food. That is where a lot of it is happening. Pretoria is the biggest ministerial estate. It's certainly not the only place where these houses are. There are 126 different official residences for ministers and deputy ministers, both in Cape Town and in Pretoria. But it is really, Pretoria is the heart of where these changes are being affected. And so it is very important that we send a message that where this is playing out is where we will take the public anger. It has to be directed somewhere, very specifically, and Pretoria is that place. It is behind those walls that all of these perks are being enjoyed, and it is outside the walls that the people of South Africa suffer shortages of things like water and electricity. So that is why we are focusing on that.
Thank you very much. The requests coming in now are for one-on-one interviews, which we'll deal with after this media briefing. I'd like to thank the panel, Dr. Leon Schreiber and Zakhele Mbhele. Thank you very much for participating in this. And to the media out there and the public who are watching this saga is long from finished. A lot more still to happen. So please keep tabs and let us know if you want to speak to any of the panelists, and we'll arrange it. Thank you. Take care. Be safe.